All right, what's up, guys? Justin here. Hope you guys are having a good Sunday. We are in an interesting time. Nothing different. I mean, I think there's case studies from all the previous recessions to try to triangulate what's going on right now. It's a little bit of this one. It's a little bit of like the 99, 2000, 2001 dot-com bust. There's a little bit of like the 1971 taking off Bretton Woods. There's a little bit of, like I said, there's combinations, like, you know, history rhymes. It doesn't exactly repeat itself, you know? And so, but I think that's the best way to try to navigate through these periods. And so there are some fundamentals that you need to just keep in your pocket, and I did want to talk about that today. And that's kind of like three classic approaches to evaluating an asset, right? If you're not doing this, that's a problem. You need to, this should be burned into your memory. Comps approach, income approach, expenses approach. And let me redo that order, and I'll talk about them in a comps, cost approach, and then an income approach. So the one that everyone uses most of the time is kind of like the comps approach. That's kind of like the safest. It's an inductive approach of what everyone else is paying. It's basically a dope test of what the market is doing. That's what they mean by comps, the comparables approach. So you're looking at stuff of similar type property, similar size, similar location, etc. Like, and what features and variables you use does depend on the property a lot of times. Single family residential, it does get the variables get narrower. But if you get into like some of these weird extreme scenarios where there's not many comps, then you got to get a little more creative with how you triangulate and estimate the value of the property. And that's where those other ones come in place. And I think the other two also come in place for commercial reasons too. Especially in the commercial space, income approach becomes way more important. And which one you use also changes with the metagame. Like, you know, if everybody uses this approach and that compresses your projected return from the other two approaches, that's the game. So you don't hate the game because everyone else is playing that strategy. You know, it just is what it is, and you just roll with it. And you can usually back out, like with enough experience, the right agent and the right investor can back out what's most likely being used for certain types of properties, right? So let's go through this comps approach. So this is like the kind of the ones that appraisers uses most of the time in the residential game. This is what realtors are taught to do a CMA. What you're doing is you're looking at, going back to what I was saying earlier, similar type of property, similar location, similar size, similar year build. So when I do a residential comp analysis and I'm pulling comps, I usually do plus or minus 500 square feet or something like that. And I'm trying to zero, like the goal is to try to get a handful of identical properties that have sold within a certain specific period, ideally within the last 90 days, that are of similar size, year build, location, ideally same subdivision, plus or minus 5 years, that sort of thing. And in my approach, what I do is I use the narrowest criteria first, and if I can't get enough comps, then I start expanding the variables until I get enough comps to justify the data. Okay? And so there is a soft science. It's a bit of an art to get a feel for like how markets kind of change over certain geographic features. So like if there's something on the other side of the highway, you got to exclude it. If it's on the other side of the railroad tracks, if it's on the other side of the lake, there's certain geographic features that kind of dramatically change your comps. And if you're trying to do real comps, not just like I think how appraisers and the bank appraisers do it, it's not sufficiently accurate enough. And if you're trying to maximize your profitability and be competitive, you got to do it the way I'm telling you. Otherwise, you're going to accidentally pull shit from the other side of the street, from a completely different subdivision that was built to a completely different quality or finish. That makes no sense, and it can drag your numbers up and down and make it inaccurate. That's the ultimate problem, and you're throwing extra variability that could be eliminated if you were a little more careful with your approach. So hopefully that's self-explanatory. That's the normal, usually reliable approach. That this is what the appraisers use. It's what most realtors use. Cost approach. So let's talk about cost approach. This one, I think, is used as like an opportunity cost analysis. So here's a very good example. Let's say you're in South Central Austin. I'm passing 78704 right now, and a house built in 1965 is going for, let's say, I don't know, 1.5 million, because it's in a really cool, let's say it's in that Zilker neighborhood or something. But you can get let's say in this hypothetical scenario, you can get the lots for $500,000. So a $500,000 lot. So something that's 60 years old going for 1.5. Here's one way you can use that cost analysis, that cost approach, is if lots are going for 500 mil, and you can build, let's say you're trying to build to a nicer spec than that remodel. Let's say you're doing it, I don't know, $300 a square foot. Let's say it's a nice build in the Austin area, and Austin expenses were going up. They're coming back down a little bit, but let's stick with that. Let's run with for this scenario. And you're doing a 2,000 square foot house. Okay, so you can build 2,000 square foot house at $300 a square foot. You can build it $600,000, and you're buying the land for 500. So you're building for 1.1, and you can sell for 1.5. If let's say your comps, using the comps approach, shows you that you could sell it at that price, or there's definitely an example that house was sold for X. Hopefully that makes sense. So you can eliminate scenarios using the cost approach, and it'll help inform. It's definitely should be used all the time, especially if you're trying to look at like alternative options, cost, doing an opportunity cost analysis of whether you should build new or if you should build or just remodel. If you remodel, let's say you remodel at $80 a square foot, but you can, if you do the rebuild, it's X. You can eliminate chunks of options and opportunity and zero in on opportunity zones. Okay, so that's probably the most common way that, at least off the top of my head while I'm driving, is going to be used. There's definitely other ways, and like fee builders, probably another example. You're going to have to use that if you're building neighborhoods. One of my clients that I'm working with right now is we're trying to locate fee builders that want to work with us at certain rates, and so it's this like multi-variable, zeroing in on opportunity zones across like 10 or 15 variables. And one of them, if we're working with a fee builder, we can zero in on cost per square foot. That will, and there's steps, obviously. So depending on the size of the project, they'll offer us XXX or whatever. But yeah. So that's what this cost approach is about. It's like you're trying to figure out what the projected costs are and see if the profitability would meet that. The third one, which I think is I think we saw this approach get manifested in the residential game over the past couple years because of these corporate landlord guys, where all they were after was a certain capitalization rate, a certain cap rate, a certain internal rate of return. And as long as the numbers hit that number, they were like, okay, we'll buy that. As long as they're getting that And they were operating at very, very lean margins relative to the small guys like us. Like, we want to get 10 caps and we want 15 caps. If we're in small markets, we want 20 caps. These guys are willing to operate at 4, 5% net. It's after expenses, right? So I think that approach by some of these big guys, they're able to process a lot of property this way. And you'll see it also on the retail side for commercial. That's where you see, commercial real estate going for, a gas station going for $5 million, $10 million, just because it has a corner with a lot of ridiculous traffic, like right here. Like that Valero, I don't know if that Valero is worth 10 mil, but maybe let's say 5 mil or something. It's a captured audience that's passing, that they have, they're just dripping advertising on them every day. They come home from work, coming to and from work. You'll see it on the other retail properties too, restaurants. That's a really good example where, like, if a restaurant knows based off certain data that they'll make, let's say a McDonald's knows that they can make $10 million on this corner, they'll pay a certain percentage of their net cash flow to secure a space, right? So let's use that $10 million number. So let's say there's a corner that a McDonald's is interested in, and based off their data, they can try and they're estimating that they can gross, let's say $10 million, and they're netting $2 million a year at that corner at that rate or something like that. And so with their total investment, let's say they can buy the property. Based off that number, they want to be able to pay off that whole entire project, purchase plus build, within 5 or 6 years. Let's say 5 years, because it's an even number. So if they're netting $2 million a year, and let's say the cost to build their project property, the building that they want to do is $3 million. In 5 years, their net cash flow would be $10 mil. That means they could possibly pay for that residential land up to $7 million potentially. Does that make sense? Some of the really big corporate guys operate on like that 5-6 year scale. The smaller guys, they want to pay off the project within 3 to 4 years. But that's how extreme it can be. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say. Like that's huge. Like hopefully that opens up your guys' mind on how some of this stuff is done. I'm working with a client that's doing a restaurant. This is exactly what we're doing right now. Is where we're getting some very useful data that we can get really, really accurate with our projected incomes in anywhere in Texas and for the United States for that matter, but we're looking in Texas. And we can figure out what the gross volume is going to be. We can figure out, because of the gross volume, we can figure out their margins, and from the margins we can figure out their net cash flows and what they'll make in 3 to 5 years, and we can figure out the project size for that to work. And this creates windows of, all right, so within X, assuming worst case scenario on all these variables, we think we can do this for X much, and we can figure out what their absolute dollar should be for that area that hits all the criteria across the scale. So comps approach, cost approach, income approach, they're all useful. And especially if you're going to expand your horizons beyond residential, you're going to need to know all three. And you're going to learn to be creative about getting your comps. Like you're not going to be able to get, like once you start diving into land and commercial, comparables are not immediately accessible on the MLS anymore. You're going to have to learn how to dig into county records, county clerk's office records, and there's other websites that rely on data, and there's other government entities that certain industries are required to report data that you can use to get very reliable income data on competitors and whatnot, and it's all useful. And if you're going to level up and continue to survive in this business, you're going to have to know how to do those things. So anyways, that's my time. Hope you guys are having a good one. I'll catch you later.